Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. I am your host and beat reporter, and I have been your beat reporter for On SI, covering the Jacksonville Jaguars every single day since August 2019, and we are continuing to march forward to another offseason together. As always, you can find our 24/7, 100% free, boots on the ground coverage of the Jacksonville Jaguars every single day when you follow us on social media such as Facebook and Twitter at Jaguars on SI. And you can also find us at www.si.com/NFL/Jaguars. In today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast, we are previewing OTA number 10. It is the final OTA practice for the Jaguars before they have their 3-day mandatory minicamp next week. And it will be our last chance to see the Jaguars in an OTA setting until you more or less see them in an ONT setting again in minicamp. Minicamp, to me, the biggest difference covering minicamp and OTAs has been one is voluntary and, one isn't. Like I've explained to you guys, when a player is not at voluntary minicamp, I don't really note it. I just don't think it's a story in and of itself. Now, if it's the player is stating, hey, I'm not coming to minicamp for this reason, yada, 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 it makes it, and thus, you have a reason that it becomes newsworthy, that's maybe an exception. But I don't think it's a noteworthy thing when players are not at OTAs, because it is 100% voluntary and 100% in their CBA rights that they do not have to attend. Mandatory minicamp, obviously that's when attendance to me matters. There's obviously been cases in the NFL's past where guys, haven't attended mandatory minicamp for one reason or another. So when that happens, that's obviously worth noting. So that to me is the biggest difference between OTAs and minicamp. Minicamp is actually important when guys, aren't there, don't show up, etc. Otherwise, I think, from what we've seen at OTAs so far, we've kind of hit on what we've wanted to see, what the practices have revealed to us in terms of all the position groups. I'm obviously going to talk about a couple moves here that they've recently made, but just at the close of OTAs, just seeing how guys close things out, I guess, is a big thing to look, because obviously there's another week of work the very next week, but just seeing how they look in one more competitive setting, every time we see them in there, even if it is an off-season voluntary practice, it's still an important setting, to watch them in. I think that over the course of OTAs, I've seen several Jaguars players stand out. Montero Brown has been one on defense, so we'll continue to see if he does so. Travis Hunter has progressed, in my opinion, a great deal since rookie minicamp through OTAs, so seeing that again. But I would say the two now biggest things to look at for at OTAs are the two new players on the roster. The Jaguars made two moves on Tuesday, signing former longtime defensive lineman, spent 7 years with Jacksonville, DeJuan Smoot. He's now he has had 8 years in the NFL, 7 of which in Jacksonville. Very, very experienced player, very productive player over the course of his career. His assistant defensive line coach in Buffalo is not a defensive line coach in Jacksonville. He said in an interview with Action Sports Jax, Marcel Robinson, that he might even, talking about his role, it might be something he even plays inside at times. So to me, it's not hard to see how he fits into the scheme. Just seeing how he looks after a year away from Jacksonville. He was obviously, I would presume, much more healthy last year in Buffalo than he was during the 2023 season. It was just such an odd circumstance that the Jaguars found themselves. They didn't even find themselves in, that they put themselves in. DeJuan Smoot had a fantastic 2022 season, gets hurt with the Achilles injury late in the year on that awful New York Jets turf. Ends up rehabbing, resigns with the Jaguars in the offseason as a free agent. They see him as their number 3 edge, and once he gets healthy and gets rolling, they think that their pass rush depth would be, solidified. That was simply just one of the big, not this specific circumstance, but this idea that they could kind of patchwork, and fill the number 3 edge position with guys who just maybe didn't make sense for it at the time. Smoot, when healthy, obviously is a fantastic number 3 edge and had been in Jacksonville for a long time. Immediately coming off an Achilles injury. Would make a lot of sense as a number 4 guy, as long as you had a plan. They didn't have one. Last year, it's on Eric Armstead, seemingly, as the number 3 edge. We don't need to rehash why that was a poor decision. I don't need to rehash, in my opinion, the Eric Armstead defensive end thing anymore. It's become the conversation that I'm no longer wishing. After everything, I think what's been said has been said on it now at this point, finally. But essentially, the Jaguars had, in past years, just had kind of bizarre answers to fill that number 3 edge. And that's not an indictment on Smoot, who he is as a player. It's just him coming off of an injury. I've always been a big Smoot fan. To me, is one of the best pure locker room guys I've covered in Jacksonville since I started covering the team in 2019. Does everything right off the field, does things right on the field, plays hard, respected. Just a lot of good things to say about Juwan Smoot. Obviously looked much healthier in Buffalo last year, still has something to give. So I think as a guy who can potentially slide inside, as a guy who can provide more edge on the depth, more depth on the edge, excuse me. You look at their edge room now. It went from entering the offseason with Josh Hines-Allen, Trayvon Walker, and then Miles Cole. It is now Trayvon Walker, Josh Hines-Allen, Emmanuel Ogbah, Juwan Smoot, Miles Cole. World beaters? No, but that's the thing. Nobody is asking for the number 3 and number 4 edges, etc., to be world beaters. You just want some depth there. Some guys who have been productive, some guys who have traits, and Ogbah and Smoot have that. They're both productive. They're both reliable. Smoot has versatility, obviously, of where he can rush. He had a lot of success rushing inside while with the Jaguars during his first 7-year stint. So to me, I'm interested to see him at OTAs, just seeing him, mixing him the rest of the defensive line and what defense coordinator Anthony Campanile has planned for him. The other addition, Trenton Irwin from the Cincinnati Bengals, a big receiver, somebody who has inside-outside versatility, can be kind of a big slot. Doesn't have blazing speed or anything like that, but real positive-handed guy. Again, big catch radius, big guy, kind of a possession guy. And to me, a natural fit because all these offenses from the Sean McVay guys, O'Connell, LaFleur, everybody that has come through under him, looking Zach Taylor, his offense in Cincinnati, now Liam Cohen's in Jacksonville. All these offenses are obviously different. These guys put their own stamp on things, their own twists, their own, identity. But I think it's important to note that their roots are all very similar. They all come back to the Sean McVay offense. That, yes, there'll be things very different between all of them, but there will also be some similar just core principles and philosophies. So to me, it makes sense as an instant fit. Has played in the Cincinnati Zach Taylor offense for a long time. They needed, in my opinion, through OTA so far, they needed to add a veteran receiver to compete for that number 5 spot. I think that obviously you look at their receiver roster and the first 4 guys easily, Brian Thomas Jr., Travis Hunter, De'Ami Brown, then Parker Washington. And then, it's a host of rookies, a second-year guy in Joshua Cephas, long-term backup guy in Austin Trammell, who's kind of been known as a slot guy, all trying to figure things out and trying to compete for a spot. I think adding an experienced veteran who has produced some as a number 4, number 5 guy and has done so in a similar offense makes a lot of sense. So I'm interested to see, Irwin in practice for the first time. I'd imagine, obviously, running more so with the backups, etc. But I'm interested to see how he looks as well. Thank you guys for listening to today's episode. Please do not forget to subscribe, follow, whatever you got to do on all of your audio podcast platforms such as Spotify and Apple Podcasts at the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. You can also find all of our videos on YouTube at Sports Videos on SI.